we always talk about is you can't give what you don't have. And so a lot of times we expect our kids to not be afraid and we just tell them, don't be scared, don't be scared, but without giving them any real good truth as to why they shouldn't, or talk about what they're actually afraid of. So when we think about parenting from a place of truth and not fear, one thing we always talk about is important for you to recognize your own fear as a parent, and recognize what that feels like so that you're dealing with it in real time, while your kids are watching, because they watch what you do. And so it's quite one thing to tell them to not be afraid when you're parenting from a place of fear. So we always say, what do our fears tell you about ourselves? What do our fears tell us about ourselves? Well, one thing it tells us is that we're not in control, right? After 16 years of traveling all over the country and not knowing what's going to happen, I mean, that is one thing that God has showed me in my fears, that I am not in control. And what ends up happening is, because I know that, I try to control everything. So one thing I have to recognize is that I am not in control and God is, and that should help me tame some of my desire to make everything look a certain way or be a certain way, because ultimately I'm not in control.
Yeah, and also kind of going back to what you said at first, it's important that we are vulnerable with our kids when it comes to fear. And even, something as silly as being afraid of the dark or afraid of an incident that they are, I don't know, 10,000 times bigger than, and they're afraid of those things. I found power in telling my kids, I was scared of certain things when I was a kid too. Or guess what? I'm afraid right now. Like when I have to go and speak in front of people and do this, or right before a game, I remember having a conversation with my daughter and she asked me, Daddy, are you afraid when you go play football? Now, to her, obviously, I was a professional athlete playing in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And, why should I be afraid? This is what I do. But yes, I'm nervous. Like when I'm in that tunnel, when I'm preparing, when I'm about to come out there for the first drive of the game, I'm scared. I'm nervous, even though I'm prepared. And in many ways, fear is something that is very, very common to humanity. And whether you are a child, whether you're an adult, we all experience fear and trepidation in different ways. So as parents, sometimes we're tempted to act like supermen and superwomen and act like we have it all together and we're brave. And that's important. Our kids should see us as being courageous and brave, but we also need to relate to them and say, we have certain fears that we still deal with, because then we're able to teach them how to overcome those fears. And not even necessarily overcome all of them, but to be able to manage them and work through them. When scripture talks so much about being strong and being courageous, I mean, that shows up not just in the book of Joshua, it shows up in Corinthians, it shows up in Chronicles, it shows up in Psalms.
It's all over the place.
Like I used to use that verse a lot, to Joshua 1:9, and be like, I thought that was the only time God said, be strong and courageous. But as we're doing our little read through the Bible in a year thing, I'm like, man, that phrase keeps on coming up, because as human beings, we are scared, but courage is being able to overcome in spite of your fear. It's not the absence of fear. And so being vulnerable with your children is vitally important to connecting with them, so that you can work through fear, but that you can also point them to the one who can help them work through their fears.